If you're listening on podcast, be sure to tune in to our YouTube channel for more content. The link is in the description.
Welcome to Wild and Weird Radio, a Wild and Weird West Virginia podcast.
We've all heard of Stonehenge in England, but how many are aware that there's a similar megalithic site in North America? On a hill in New Hampshire are the remains of an ancient site. Some say that date back 4,000 years. Much like Stonehenge, this site exhibits signs of archeoastronomy and has many confirmed astronomical alignments that point to an advanced building technology. Though its construction is debated by some, others see this unique site as a very important region and a link to our forgotten past. Who built it and why? We're joined by Dennis Stone, owner and president of America's Stonehenge, who will go over the site's history and some theories surrounding it on this episode of Wild and Weird Radio.
Welcome back to Wild and Weird Radio, everybody. We have got another awesome show planned for you guys today. We've got another interview actually lined up, and it's going to be a pretty interesting show. We'll get into the introductions on that here in just a minute because we have some wild and weird news updates for you guys. This isn't going to be the typical wild and weird news. As you can see, Jess is out today, got bad weather down their way. Ron is actually would have almost been knocked out as well, but we were able to get him in a cell phone. So here we are. And this is a crazy, crazy arrangement for the show today, but we're making it happen because we love you guys. So, Ron, I know you had a good weekend this past weekend. Tell everybody about what you got yourself into.
We had a really good weekend. We managed to make it up to Cryptid Bash 2 and meet a lot of really great people, just incredible people. If you came over to the table and shared your account with us, my goodness, thank you. That was amazing. There were so many people who came up to the table who were experiencers, and they were literally quoting each other. They had never met. They had not seen each other, yet they were saying the exact same stories. So again, I'll say it, either everyone's having mass hallucinations of the exact same thing, which is pretty scary, or something's happening. And that's pretty much it. But we had a really good time. There was a lot of great people there. I think the Moth Boys hit it out of the park there pretty good in Morgantown. And I hear it's going to be bigger and better next time. That's what they're telling me.
That's what I understand as well. I unfortunately wasn't able to make it up with you. I wish I could have gone, but having the new runt here to take care of this short after is just really hard for me to make it out anywhere. But
yep,
we've got big news coming up because the next appearance that we're going to be making publicly is going to be at the Mothman Festival. We're going to be set up with our usual booth there. We're going to be in a different location though this time because dun dun dun. We're speakers this year, guys. In case you didn't know, Ron and I are going to be speaking at the Mothman Festival. We can't wait. It's going to be a blast. We're excited to see everybody there. And then, of course, we've got Wild and Weird Con coming up just a few short weeks after Mothman Festival. And you do not want to miss that one. Jessi's going to be, her and Joe are going to be leading the night investigation VIP event, which is going to involve food and all that good stuff.
And
So
you're going to get to play with some really cool equipment.
Oh, yeah.
Amazing stuff.
It's going to be awesome. You do not want to miss it. There's starting to fill up, guys. So if you're interested in coming to Wild and Weird Con's VIP event, you want to make sure to get on that very soon. All right.
Yeah. Hey guys, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe also to the show. There's so many things to like, share, and subscribe to, right, Joe? I mean, we've got YouTube, we've got the actual podcast, which I have to say, thank you to everyone, because it is really getting out there. I had a lot of people come up to the table, and they were actually looking for us. So wow,
yeah,
that's pretty awesome.
It's impressive, guys. Thank you all everywhere, all around the world that are tuning in, literally all around the world, because we go through our metrics on a regular basis and we look at who's listening and where. And we literally have people all over the globe who are tuning in, week out, and hanging out with us for an hour and a half sometimes, and just following all the crazy stuff that we can go get into. And so thank you for that. And hopefully we'll get to see even more of you on the road in the future.
Oh, absolutely. And I have to tell you, Joe, there was a couple people who were very impressed. They had the Cooking with Cryptids book by Dave Spinks there, the one I did the art for, and you provided some of the recipes. And they all agreed the yellow slaw is it. Absolutely.
It's where it's at, man.
That's where
that yellow slaw, that family recipe is hard to beat, my friend.
It really is. It really is. So if you haven't tried that yellow slaw, get a hold of us, and we'll make sure that you get the link so you can go buy the book and do all that stuff. Or maybe just pick it up from us at one of the shows.
Yeah, catch us at one of the shows. We're going to have copies with us from now till the end of time.
Probably.
So, well, guys, it's been another kind of slow news week. So there's no real wild and weird news to go over with you guys. Outside of more photographs dropping from the web, but those, I mean, you've seen them. We've talked about it multiple times.
Yeah. You've seen that. And we saw the big news, I guess, this week was the whole fake AI thing.
Yeah.
Wow. And finally, I don't know if you saw the update, but finally they did track down the guy who made it. And yes, everyone, before you start arguing, because you already started, it was not real. It was an design made by an artificial intelligence, and it should scare you. That's all I'm going to say about that. We also have a little blog over on our site that you can go read about that, and that's about it. I mean, aside from robots trying to take over, it's been a great week.
Well, before we go any further in the show, remember, if you're watching on YouTube, go ahead and hit that like button right now, because that spreads the reach of our show on YouTube much farther. If you're downloading us on a podcast format, make sure you subscribe and download every episode, because both of those help us in the runnings. And again, that furthers our reach. And for that, we thank you all who have already done such a small act that has helped us in such a large way. So this week's episode is really interesting. We're going to be going over what is been dubbed America's Stonehenge. And we actually have the president of America's Stonehenge, Dennis Stone, on the show with us. Give a brief rundown on him. He is a graduate of Daniel Webster College back in 1977. He has a degree in aviation management. He was a full-time commercial pilot for over 35 years. And America's Stonehenge was opened to the public in 1958 by Dennis's father, Robert Stone. Dennis has been involved with American Stonehenge for practically his entire life. And he's always had a fascination with archaeology and archeoastronomy. Now, since he's retired, he's found many serpentine walls and spirit windows throughout the site that is known as America's Stonehenge, and plenty of other discoveries to go along with that. So without further ado, Mr. Dennis Stone, how are you today, my friend?
I'm doing good. Thank you so much for having me on this evening.
Oh, we're really excited to have you on. Ron, I know, has been he's big into the archaeoastronomy and so am I. We've been watching this stuff for a long time. Ron's been studying it for forever, and I know he's been amped up to have you on since we first scheduled you.
Oh, terrific. I'm glad to be here this evening. Thank you guys so much.
Absolutely.
So, just to get us started here, tell us a little bit about America's Stonehenge.
Right. Well, it's kind of it's an unusual site. It shouldn't exist in this part of the country, according to mainstream scholars. Not all, but many of them. There aren't any ancient stoneworks in the Northeast. Basically, we know Native Americans were in New Hampshire. As a matter of fact, they just found a site about 100 miles west of here, near Keene, New Hampshire, that goes back about 13,000 years. And prior to that, they had evidence in the northern part of the state above the White Mountains, not too far from the Canadian border, of what we about 10 to 12,000-year-old Paleo Native Americans, or Paleo Indians, they call it. So people were here going way back in time, right after the glacial period. However, who built this particular site is unknown today. It dates to about 4,000 years. And it's constructed of large stone slabs that cover about 110 acres, basically. And when my dad got involved with it back in the 1950s, they knew of about maybe 24 sites across the Northeast. And over the last over 60 years, they've discovered about 800 sites, starting in Quebec, Canada. And they go right down to Virginia, actually. They go right through the Hudson Valley. I think that's the highest concentration, is Dutchess, Putnam, and Westchester County. And when you look at the chambers down there, these are stone structures with big stone roofs, standing stones, cairns, chambered cairns. Also, there's different types of features, including, you mentioned the Serpentine Walls, which are actually kind of new to us. They actually go right across the landscape. They're all over New England. Vermont has Woodstock, Royalton, Putney, Pulteney, Vermont has many, many different chambers. Generally, they're along big rivers, like the Merrimack River in New England, the Connecticut River, the Hudson River, and some of the other rivers like the Susquehanna. There's some sites too. But who built these structures is still unknown today. Again, they're not really supposed to be here, and it's just not our site. But they're all over the landscape of the Northeast. And I did retire from American Airlines about 6 years ago, and I started finding some of the walls out in the woods that kind of remind me of a snake. One of them was about 27 feet long, not very large. It seemed to have a head, body, and a tail. I was riding my ATV through the woods in the direction of where my dad used to live. He died in 2009. And so this is 7 years later. He never knew about the Serpentine Walls, although he was very, very interested in the walls that all over the hill. He used to go out and look at them all the time and measure them and try to figure out what their meaning was. And they did not look like farmers' walls. They had a whole, they turn, they twist, they bend, they also have big slabs of stone stood up vertically in them, and some have like little structures inside of them. So they didn't look like farmers' walls or agricultural walls whatsoever, which are all over the New England. They say there's about 240,000 miles of historic walls built in the last 300 years all over New England, which I guess has the highest concentration of walls anywhere in the world. But those are historic walls. You can run them all the way to the moon. But these walls have a different look, a different architecture to them, if you will. And the one I saw, it looked like a serpent. It seemed to have this stone that seemed to look like a head. And I got off my ATV. I was riding through the woods. I walked about 80 feet over to it. And I looked at it more closely. I'd seen it many, many times going to my dad's house. He lived on went over to it and I looked at it and I said, gee, it looks like it has a body that kind of tapers down. And then when I looked at the end of it, where a tail would be, if that's what it was a big flat slab, maybe about 3 feet long, kind of rectangular shape. And it reminded me something of a rattlesnake tail, although they do come round in different shapes, but it kind of reminded me of that. And I said, I think I got a serpent wall. And I had no frame of reference in the spring of 2016. And I started seeing this again in some of the other walls that I had seen since I was a kid, going back to the 1950s. And I'm like, they look different to me. They took on a whole different appearance. Part of the problem is these walls were hiding in the woods. There's brush, there's trees. And if you only see a little piece of the wall, you can't see the whole shape of it. And so you have to kind of look around the walls very carefully. Well, I found a few of them in the spring of 2016. And then I don't know if you've heard of the show America on Earth with Scott Walters.
Yeah.
It was on History Channel and Travel Channel for 3 years. So he was up with the whole entourage. Alan Butler from England, he's been on History Channel, and his wife and Scott's wife, and it was probably about 20 people. And I took them out and I showed them the first, I think, 3 serpents. And this was probably May of 2016. And they looked at them and said, oh my gosh, they do kind of look like snakes. One of them was S-shaped, another one was lanyard, straight one, the first one I found, about 27 feet. And then there was a couple others, I guess one other that had a certain shape to it. And I said, I don't know if these are serpents or not, but they certainly look like it. About the spring of 2017, we went to a meeting in Groton, Connecticut, and there were sites all over Connecticut, in Moodus, Danbury, the Hudson River, as I mentioned, but going back towards Gunjewamp, which is in Groton, Connecticut. That's been known about since John Pynchon wrote to Governor Winthrop in 1654, and he was wondering what the site was back 368 years ago. So if this was all built by farmers, even down there, why wouldn't they have known that? They were questioning what these structures were down there. And you'll see similarities to our site at this site in Connecticut. It covers about 200 acres. It's right near the Navy base, and the Navy base actually tries to protect it, from vandals and so forth. So we were at a meeting down there, and a gentleman from North Stonington, Connecticut, he writes for Yankee Magazine. He's a photographer, and he writes about New England fishing villages. He's lived there for, by then, 30 years. And his book, called Ceremonial Stonework, was all about North Stonington. And we knew there were sites all over Connecticut. Never heard of North Stonington having anything. But as I picked up the book before he spoke, they had a whole book section. I'm looking at it going, there's just the whole Northeast, 8,000 different features, 25 categories of structures. And as I'm looking at it, I'm going, oh, wait a minute, this is one town in North Stonington. And so he did his PowerPoint presentation. He's showing all the structures, just like what we have at our site. Chambers, standing stones, cairns and everything. And then he gets into the Serpentine Walls, and that really sat me up. My wife was with me. We both sat up in our seats and said, that's exactly what we have at our site. And there's Serpentine Walls in that one town of 35,000 acres. They have 400 of them, and they're either linear, like straight, or they'll have a bent head or a bent tail. Some are shaped like S's. And some actually, like at our site, we found later on, one of them goes 2,550 feet. We GPSed it. And it comes around and it looks like it's biting its tail. And if it is what we think it is, it might be the Ouroboros. And the Ouroboros you probably heard, some people have heard of it and others haven't. I never knew about it until 2017, I guess. And it means infinity, the circle of life. The Egyptian, they think, started the Ouroboros, but it may go back before the Egyptians. And the Greeks had jewelry too, the serpent biting its tail. So we have, we think today, 3 Ouroboroses at our site. And later on, right after that gentleman spoke, there was an intermission. I met his wife. He was too busy to talk to us. He had so many people around him. He spoke for about an hour, and we were blown away by North Stonington. It's just like our site, but spread over 35,000 acres. And a lady from Colorado, east of Denver, started speaking, and she's showing on her PowerPoint. She did it by Skype. She did it with 2 male colleagues. I was hoping she would travel out from Colorado so we could talk to her in person. But east of Denver and below Nebraska and a couple counties, she mentioned the name. She had she had standing stones, she had cairns, chambered cairns, linear cairns, just like this gentleman from North Stonington was showing, but without trees. And then she got into her serpentine walls. And again, my wife and I kind of sat up and said, we got that. And one of them looked exactly like one of our 14 today we have at our site. It looked just like one of our 14 serpentine walls with the same kind of triangular stone head with a body behind it and everything. And we're like, wow, all the way up to Colorado. We have one wall at our site. It's big. It's for a very large area. It circles an area. It looks like the letter D. And I did a diorama of our site back in when I was in college back in 77. I think I finished it. And it's in display in our museum when you walk into our visitor center. It's right there when you first walk in. And if you look at it, you'll see like the letter D, a wall pattern. Well, they have them in North Stonington, and they have them all the way out to Colorado. So that's just another feature, like our site, down in Connecticut and also 2,000 miles west of us, next to the Serpentine Walls. So it's like, wow, all across out to there. And then we found out they were in Weed, California. I got 110 photographs sent to me of Weed by Mount Shasta. And they got different wall patterns that look like the ones here, Colorado and down in North Stonington and elsewhere in the Northeast. And they have the Serpentine Walls out there too, which again, that really kind of blew our mind, almost 3,000 miles west of here, the same kind of stone features. So it raises a lot of questions, who were these people? Were these structures built around the same time, or were there different time periods they were built? Were they in contact with one another? Or are these things invented, just coincidentally they look the same? And after that, we talked to Dr. Holstein from Jacksonville State University in Alabama. And he has a 40 square mile area down there. One Mountville, Alabama, which I could get to. But this 40 square mile area, it's not well known to the public. He's been researching it since the 70s. And he has standing stones and big cairns. These are big piles of rocks, again, somewhat similar to what we have at our site and elsewhere in the Northeast. And then he starts showing his serpentine walls, and he calls them rattlesnake walls. And I think they're a little bit smaller on the average than ours, a little bit shorter, maybe a little less, the height is a little bit lower. But again, the same kind of thing down in Alabama. So from Ontario, Canada, where there's one I know of up there, all the way down to Alabama, from our site going all the way out to California, there's these stone, features that are similar, particularly the Serpent Walls. And if you heard of the Serpent Mound in Ohio, I don't think it's too far from you, Ron. Mark Eddy goes over there quite often, and that's pretty famous.
Yep.
Not too far at all. Yeah. I think you're in Charleston. I used to overnight down. Yep. I used to fly from LaGuardia and do a quick overnight, get in there about 9 at night, and then go back to LaGuardia and then go off and fly some more legs. But I used to enjoy it there. I got there so late. There's a museum there that I wish I could have visited. I think that's where some of the artifacts Mark Eddy's brought up,
Oh, yeah, right there at the Cultural Center in downtown.
Yeah, we get there at 9 o'clock at night almost all the time, go to the hotel, try to grab something to eat, get up at 5 in the morning, and fly back to LaGuardia, so that was our overnight down there. It's so short, like we had about a 9-hour overnight or 10-hour. But
right there where you were located, you were in a hot area because there used to stand 187 mounds just in the Charleston area alone.
That many? All of them, I heard of a few.
All of them were leveled except for 3.
Oh, isn't it a shame? That's a shame,
Hey, I got a question.
That's all. Sure.
Your serpentine walls, about how high were those, Dennis?
Yeah, they basically just a couple feet tall, 2 to 3 feet tall. I have a Nova Scotia duck golden retriever she can jump over. Some are actually still sitting on like ridges of bedrock, and for some reason, although the hilltop is probably there when they built the site, we believe around 4,000 years, because the glaciers had removed most of the soil, and it's a very slow, gradual process of the soil being created up there from wind-blown soil and vegetation decay. There's also erosion. So when you ask the question, how much goes below the ground? Only a few inches, from what we can tell. A couple of areas, 18 inches of soil have built up from excavations, which is quite deep, to just a few inches, So just a couple feet tall. You could probably step over most of them, except where they put the vertical slabs up. Those are kind of like 3 or 4 feet tall. They're kind of big, but most of the wall's not that high.
Yeah, there's actually a couple of sites in West Virginia with those same short walls. And are on areas of archaeological interest, so that does seem to be something. In fact, if you know as well as I do, if you go, the Serpent Mound is not very high. It's only a few feet.
Couple feet. Right.
Yeah. These things, they weren't made for defensive purposes, is what I'm getting.
Right. Good point. Very good point.
Yeah. You've definitely got something there. I mean, what it was used for. But
and all the photos of the area are it's gorgeous rock work.
It's amazing.
And it's although albeit primitive, it's still just it's beautiful rock work. Now with the in comparison to the ones that have been found out west, are they using similar types of stone? Like, are they using granite? Are they using sandstone, limestone? Have there been any consistencies there?
In the Northeast, mostly granite, because we're the granite state, New Hampshire, and
right.
But as you go further west,
you're in the great upheaval zone.
Yeah, exactly. So I think you'd have to. What I wanted to do 2 years ago, I was going to be in Santa Cruz doing at the university doing a lecture, and I was going to take 5 days. We're going to be there, and I was going to, at the end of it, take my car and go up to Mount Shasta and check those out and look at them and see what they look like up close and what type of rock it is, and then talk to a geologist and see what type of materials they are. So I don't really know, the local materials of each of these, like in Colorado. Although we've been out to Colorado many times, I haven't visited those sites, which I got to find them. They're not on the regular road maps. A lot of these sites, even in the Northeast, some are open to the public, others are on private property, some are on public property, state, federal, or even national forest. There's no road signs. Most of them don't have any kind of facilities, restrooms or anything like that. A few do, like our site. All the conveniences when you come up, we have restrooms and, a gift shop and everything. That way, people come in, they can see a 12-minute video. And then we have that free app download, and it can do a complete tour. At other places, if you can find them, you are on your own, basically, and most time you have to ask permission of the landowners to go on them. So when you go out west to Colorado, I got to find out the woman's name was Elizabeth, and the group that the meeting was called New England Antiquities Research Association. A group started in 1964 by my dad in our basement. And it's almost 60 years going strong, and they're all over the Northeast and members out west. And they had that guest speaker, down, and she did it by Skype. And I wanted to talk to her and find out if we go out there, is there a possibility of meeting up with her and she can show us that? But I didn't have the opportunity. She was talking on Skype and she did a few questions on there and then she was gone, and I never got back in touch with her. So, but besides the Serpent Walls, we started finding these windows in the walls too, these beautiful linteled windows, maybe 2 feet wide, maybe the width of the wall wide, in thickness, and then the height of it might be a foot or two. They vary, actually. These windows vary in size, but they're right in the stone walls, and a lot of them are in the Serpent Walls, and we don't know the correlation yet. They're in North Stonington, Connecticut too, because again, when I opened up the book, I had already found a couple of what I called windows, and then they are down in North Stonington in the walls too. In the Berkshires in Massachusetts, a very beautiful area of Massachusetts, there are some serpentine walls there, and the one pictures I have seen have windows in them too. Some people refer to these windows as soul holes or spirit holes. And I've done a couple of shows with Maria Wheatley from England, and her dad visited us 40 years ago. She's kind of big over in Europe, particularly in England. She does a lot of podcasts and she writes books. She's an archaeologist, but she really gets into dowsing and that kind of thing, which is interesting. But she, after a show, said, "Hey, hold on, I'll show you something." And she showed me one of the spirit windows in Dartmoor, and it looked like one of ours. And she goes, "We call those, I believe it was spirit holes." She said the spirits are supposed to flow through these things. There's no practical purpose for these windows whatsoever. But I started finding them in 2016, and we went to that meeting again, and there they are down in Connecticut. And then we find that they're elsewhere too, even in Vermont and some of the walls. Some of ours have stone shutters. You can actually shut them with stone. Some actually have the shutters still in place. They're like blinds, they're built up vertically with flat slabs right inside. And we don't like to touch anything on our site because as soon as you do, you disturb it, It's not a good thing to do archaeologically if you can help it. So we just took and wiggled the stones in one of the windows, and it was found when the History Channel was doing a filming there, and they wrapped up the day. You're heading out with all the equipment, and one of our assistant archaeologists that was there for the day to help out said, "Isn't that a window over there?" And we walked over, all of us. He said, "My God, it is." And unfortunately, the camera wasn't rolling. That would have been so cool. And it has horizontal blinds, and it was like one of our other ones that has a stone shutter that was set up vertically in it.
So
Some of the windows are multiple ones in a row. Like one of them has 4 of them, and it's in a serpent wall.
The windows with the shutters, have you drawn any kind of correlation with those shutters and say the direction of the rising sun or the direction of the storms that move through the area? Because I know a lot of, in general, depending on where your geographic location is, I know here where we live right along the river, all of our storms fly upriver.
Oh, really? Wow.
So if we have a storm coming in from the opposite direction, we know it is going to be a doozy. But in general, all of our storms go upriver here, and they follow that river path. So I'm curious if these were windows that were placed in the structure if the shutters served as maybe a purpose for either stopping sun from coming up in the morning or possibly to keep rain from coming in as the wind blew the storms through.
Yeah, that's good. I'm glad you asked that. Yeah, there are windows actually in some of the stone structures themselves. They do have some windows in them. And we've known about those, forever basically, and they're cool. The Oracle Chamber, the Patty Chamber had windows in them, and the Chamber in Ruins also has a window. The one in the Oracle Chamber, I don't know if you have photographs, actually is the exit today, but it was a window originally. It was a window that the light could go in, but it was not an exit. And today, the people, when they walk through our site, they can walk into the Oracle Chamber, and the roof is about 6.5 feet above you. All the stone slabs above you, they weigh multiple tons. And it is dry stone construction. No cement was used to put these stones together. The stones were either stacked vertically or there's core billing where the wall kind of curves in, and we have core billing in our site, which seems to be an old world technique. You can see it in Europe at some of the megalithic sites, which I've been over to many times, or even down in Mexico. And I haven't been to South America yet, but I understand it's down there too. But these are actually in the stone walls themselves, and they're either near the bottom of the wall or near the, they can be halfway up. And like I say, one of them has four windows. And I saw the first one, and then I noticed one other one next to it. I said, "Oh, but there's so much brush and there was so much debris and almost covered over." And it's also the lintel stone, I think, was tilted a little bit. And then my son was with me. He goes, "Isn't that two more off to the left side of it?" So that one we call it the four-window wall, and it is a serpent wall. We believe it has a triangular head. It has one other feature of a serpent wall. We found it vertical slabs of stone. These were taken off the bedrock. These are quarried, and then they were stood up vertically, almost like a spine in the back. Kind of. We call them spine stones. And I can't say every serpent wall has that, but almost all of the ones at our site, and we have 14, have these spines, these vertical slabs in them. But not all the serpents have spines, and not all of them, we think, have the windows, but the majority do have these little stone windows in the wall itself. But are they astronomically aligned? We're going to have to do some survey work. Our thought right now, looking at them, and we've been working on the astronomy since 1965, and we hired a professional surveyor. In fact, he's just retiring now. His dad was president of New England Surveyors Association. We hired him in 1973, and we just got a letter, I think, a month and a half ago from him, and he's just finishing up. He's turning in his licenses, and he's going to be all done. I said, "You got to come back and look at our serpent walls and our windows," because when he surveyed we have 110 acres. He surveyed 15 acres back in 1973 through 77. And he sent all that data to the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics down in Cambridge, Massachusetts, to analyze. And in 78, we get the results back, and they said, "Well, if those stone markers, those monoliths, were used to align with the sun, moon, and stars, for instance, they would work about 1800 BC due to the Earth's tilt." So that was in 1978. And he also said you have 24 star alignments. So that was kind of a shock to us, too. So the survey work and the astronomy has been going on for decades, and I think we're going to have to look at the windows to see if there are any astronomical alignments. But just standing there looking at them, they don't seem to be aligned with the equinoxes or solstices, cross-quarter days, or the lunar alignments at all. They seem to be just in the wall, and the thought is that they might be something to do with spirituality. I did a radio show out of Indiana a few years ago, and the woman was a medical doctor. And we got to the spirit windows, and she goes, "I was down in Dallas." And I said, "Yeah, I used to go all the time there for training." She goes, "I was a nurse down there at a hospital. I had a key to open and close windows, to lock and make sure people didn't get out for security reasons. But when a patient was getting ready to pass, the family would bring me in and ask me if I could unlock the window and open it. And that way the spirit could flow out." And I had never heard of that. And I told my wife about that later. She went to Catholic schools, and she goes, "It's not a Catholic thing," she said, "but I have heard of that, people actually opening windows." So it might be something to do with that kind of an idea, where you create this window to let your family's spirit pass through, symbolically perhaps, and then you can put the shutter up, to block it after. We just don't really know. It's speculation on our part. But in England, they think that was a purpose. And I guess through generations, people called those windows over there spirit windows, and the window was there so that the spirit could flow through it, So we can't talk to the builders, unfortunately, we wish we could. We think possibly the serpent walls are inspired by, in the northern hemisphere, Draco the constellation, which is kind of a serpent or a snake, And the Great Serpent Mound in Ohio, I talked to Jeff Wilson and Ross Hamilton. They're both involved with that. And they kind of think that Draco could have been inspirational for my best, and actually I had Jeff Wilson on the radio show and we were talking. Turns out he visited our site years ago, and he's one of the guys that's involved with that whole thing with the Great Serpent Mound in Ohio. So I got to pay him a visit sometime when we get out there too. So maybe Draco the constellation was inspirational for not only the Great Serpent Mound, and I think there are 94 mounds going towards Iowa that are serpent mounds. So that's not the only one. It's the most famous. And then we have these stone walls that go across the landscape all the way out to the West Coast. Perhaps they were looking at the heavens, bringing that down to Earth, is a thought, I don't know how you prove it, but it is kind of interesting.
There's a great deal of serpent symbology throughout the world, and a lot of thought at this point, with some theorism that the serpent is a representation of possibly a great comet, And
Yes. Yeah.
was the purpose of a lot of these who were trying to kind of come up with the Younger Dryas event, and the great cataclysm that befell everyone, I guess, around 10,000, 12,000 years ago. And the thing about it is, now they've reversed that way of thinking. They're trying to say, well, that didn't happen. But for several years, it was believed that there was a massive impact. And a lot of people did believe that our ancestors would have looked up and saw this coming and saw it as a great, serpent in the sky. And at that point, they were kind of remembering. So it's almost like they're mnemonic devices. So when we see these serpents, we don't know what they mean anymore. But that's just one theory, and it's kind of interesting because we see it pretty much worldwide.
Yes, yeah.
So
They
it is
on History Channel the other night they had a whole program about the serpents, South America and India, China,
Mhm.
or the dragon more over there, but right across Europe,
Yep.
right into. And there's one stone wall in Scotland that Scott Walter showed on the show. It was part of an esker, part of a natural thing, and I think the Great Serpent Mound has part of it where the head is partly natural, and then the rest of it was all created by man. The whole thing. They might have kind of adapted something partly natural, and then they created the rest of it. But the one in Scotland, I think, is similar, where it's a natural, I think, ridge, and then they built a stone wall, which is all artificial, made by man, turned it into a serpent. And that was one of his episodes. I've been to Scotland, but again, I never saw that, and I'd like to see what that was, how it relates or compares to
Yeah.
our stuff. So get back over there, hopefully, and check that out.
So with your site, with these stones, was there evidence of any tooling or working being done, or were these just found stones that were stacked?
Well, they used both. They used both the field stones left by nature, which New England farmers did all over the landscape here. They wanted to get rid of the rocks, and they built walls. And the walls were, boundaries. They were also field clearings, and they were also stock fences. They sometimes used a wall for all three purposes. That's very practical, and farmers weren't afraid of work, but they weren't going to waste their time building, these serpentine walls. So some of them run 27 feet, some run, 2,550 feet and loop around, But they did use slabs of stone, or what Mark Starr in his book about North Stonington calls fractured stones. These are actually taken off the bedrock by somebody. That's extra work. You have to separate the rock. You work a fissure, a crack in the bedrock, and you have to pry up. Sometimes roots will do that. Sometimes nature will help you a little bit. But you want to get the rock off the bedrock. And back in 1982, we found the first quarried slab on the 110 acres, still in situ. It was in its socket. It had been split from the bedrock. It had been raised, and it was a field stone stuck underneath it to hold it at an angle. And one of our staff, Mary, her name was Mary. I won't give out her full name, but she was very nice. She was one of our staff people, and she had been instructed by the director of research, Dr. David Stewart Smith, who joined us in 1978. So this is 4 years later. And he said, look for any kind of big slabs that might be still tilted out on the ground somewhere on the hill if you're out there looking. And it might be raised, and it might have an edge on it that shows like the edge of an arrowhead, that little dimpling where they do pressure or napping on it, pressure flaking and percussion flaking, that little serrated edge. See if you see that on the side of some of these big slabs. So she had a picnic lunch right around 40 years ago, right, probably around now. And she went out in the middle of the woods and she sat there and she had her picnic lunch. She looked down on the rock she was sitting on and goes, it looks like it's got a serrated edge. She kept looking at it. And she also realized the pot she was sitting on was actually raised up in the air. I think she got underneath, she looked at it, and there's a stone propping it up. She brought it to the attention of NERA, that group I mentioned, and David Stewart Smith, who was the director of research there and at our museum too. And the next year, they brought in Dr. Gary Hume, the state archaeologist, who was a lithic specialist up in Concord, New Hampshire, our capital. And he's a mainstream, and usually they don't like to get involved with our kind of stonework. They shouldn't; these places don't supposed to exist. But he stuck his neck out. He came down and he oversaw that particular project. And when they excavated in 1983 along the front of that stone, they went down several inches and they found all these little flakes of stone that had been hammered off with a stone hammer. They were actually dressing or shaping the stone. And what we think is they were shaping it and they were going to use a stone possibly, it looks like a roof slab, like one of the many roof slabs in the chambers that are still on the site. Maybe they were still in the process of building a much bigger complex. So he said it's unmistakable that this stone was actually, it was actually split from the bedrock. It was raised up, and then somebody was doing percussion flaking with a hammer stone on the edge of it, shaping it. And this is from, somebody from the outside. He was a state archaeologist with a doctorate in archaeology. And after that, we found 33 more. And when I retired, we found probably another dozen of them out there. So we have about 34 of these stones all over the 110 acres. Some of them are 1,000 feet from the main site. Kind of dawned on us that these guys had a bigger project with all these stone slabs. These are stone slabs that measure, some of them are a few feet across, some of them go up to like 15 feet by maybe like 5 or 6 feet. And the granite weighs about 163 pounds per cubic foot. So you can actually just measure it and determine the weight. So some of these slabs are multiple tons, and they're down the hill. They've been propped, they've been shaped, and I guess they're going to move them up the hill. Because back then we think the hill was pretty clear of trees and not as much dirt. So if they use log rollers, they could actually roll them up on the bedrock, to the site, if that's what their intention was, and they just abandoned it. So it's like, why did they abandon the site with all this work going on all over the hilltop? So you mentioned that. So these stones are actually shaped or dressed. That's the sacrificial table, the roof slabs in the chambers. Some of the roof slabs have 90-degree cuts and they actually form a lap joint with a stone next to it. So they actually interlock, which makes them a tighter fit structurally. And Dave Stewart-Smith pointed out a lot of this. He was in England for 7 years working for what is today called the English Heritage. It had a different name back in the 70s. He was from Connecticut. He went over to England. He had, I think it was a trust fund, so he had the ability to do this. And he worked for the British government. He was in Scotland working on medieval, and in England too, medieval structures and megalithic structures, doing restoration and repairs on them. Came back to the States in 78, joined that group my dad formed, NERA, and he met us. And then he got involved with our site for almost 40 years. He passed away in 2016, right when we were finding the Serpentine Walls. And I showed him a couple, and he was kind of blown away by that. But he had cancer. He was only like 65, I think, or 66. And it was a shame. And we found a couple windows, too, to lose somebody. He was a really nice guy, too, But for him, I wish he was around, because I'd like to be able to share all this with him, because he always had good insight with this kind of thing, He was kind of careful. He didn't jump to conclusions. He'd play the devil's advocate kind of thing. But when I showed it to him, that really raised his eyebrows, And he's on our video, a 12-minute video presentation. He talks about the way the stones were quarried, shaped, and everything. So that 12-minute video that's on our website, you can see it, anywhere in the world, and as well as our free app download, which is kind of nice for people that can't make it to our site.
So the walls and the structures that you have there at your site, how did they measure up in age to some of the similar structures here in the North American continent?
Yeah,
because the way that they just seem to be left behind and abandoned is really reminiscent of Clovis culture. But obviously, we know the Clovis culture was about 13,000, 12,500 years ago is whenever they stopped being around. It just suddenly disappears because of most likely some massive catastrophic event. And I'm curious if we see a similarity between the ages of these structures here in North America and quite possible another cataclysmic event that we may or may not know about.
Right. Yeah, they have to be able to date these sites, and they are starting to use a new dating. It's fairly new. It's called optically stimulated new luminescence, and they did 4 cores from our site 2 years ago. And I just talking to the president of NERA this week, asking for the results of that. Dr. Feathers out in University of Washington State is actually doing the test. He came out 2 years ago. They had 25 people on our site, Brookhaven National Laboratory. We had 2 state archaeologists down, and I had a ground penetration radar lady there to map where the cores were coming from. And I had the LiDAR gentleman who did 15 acres. He had a handheld LiDAR that took 600 hours to process the 15 acres. He's from Connecticut, too. And he's done some other sites, some of these other sites. But he's a landscape architect with a master's degree. But he got his equipment from Florida. It's pretty amazing, that LiDAR. And his friend is the GPR, the ground penetration lady. She's from Waltham, Mass. And she's got new software. She's going to blend his images with hers for 3D above and below that they did at our site. So, yeah, the problem is kind of dating these sites. You can do it astronomically if you have alignments. The Earth's tilt very slowly changes, and that's what they did with the Harvard-Smithsonian report back in 77, 78. And then the 12 carbon datings we have on our site starting in 1967 through 1995. And now we're using the optically stimulated luminescence. And the preliminary dates on 2 of the samples were before the Patty family. The Patty family was given credit for building our site, by many mainstream people. Oh, it's just some colonial farmer. Actually, he was a shoemaker. And they said, well, he built it with his 6 husky sons. He actually had 5 daughters. We have the whole thing, Actually, his great-grandfather, going back to England, Peter, and then there's Richard, and then Seth, and then Jonathan, who's given all the credit. And he died in 1849. But he was a shoemaker. He had domesticated animals. He was not a stonemason, but he did survey of some of the streets, and he was a tax collector in Salem. And for a while, 1830 to 1836, I have a handwritten book by the town of Salem. I don't know if they know I have that, all handed with the local people that put bids in to take in the poor people. And in 1837, after that year, he didn't do that anymore, but he had up to 11 people staying with him. By then, his 5 daughters had gone off and married, and his one son that made it to manhood. His other son actually died at 17 years old, so he had 2 sons. One son died in Boston from an accident, I guess, and the other one, his name was Jonathan, and the other one was Seth, and he made it to adulthood. And then he had a son named George. So we know a lot about the Patty family, but people that don't know about the site and really don't know about the Patty say, oh, they must have built the site. If so, maybe they built them all across the Northeast. I don't know, because the same kind of stonework and everything. One thing the LiDAR did show us, though, and you can see down to 1 centimeter, it has that resolution. We have the airborne LiDAR, too, taken about 10 years ago. And our guy, Tom, who has the LiDAR, said, well, the airborne, 2 years ago, the airborne was about 4 to 8 points per square meter. And then the drones were between 400 and 800 points per square meter. It's better now, I think. The technology is getting better. His had 150,000 points per square meter. It puts out 300,000 points per second, and 16 lasers go out 80 meters with a high definition camera on top. And you might have some of the images of like the watch house. I don't know if those made it to you or not. And that's one of the serpent. That's one of the biggest serpents. It's got a big boulder that looks like a head looking at you with its tail right in front of it. That's after 2,550 feet. But on the computer, you can actually zoom down to 1 centimeter. And one thing we've started looking at is the floor plans of the structures. And we found that the Patty chamber, which was not built by the Patties, but it's where the wooden house, next to where the wooden house was built, sometime probably in the 1750s. It was Patty's father, we think, built the house. The floor plan of that structure is not rectangular. The house was. And the house today, we think, is sitting down the street from our museum. It's sitting where an old tavern once burnt. And there's the Patty family in the 1890s standing in front of the house down there, with a bow or bay window. And that's the history of Salem, written in 1907 by Edgar Gilbert. It's right in that book. Well, we're finding out that not only the Patty chamber, but the courtyard, which the Patty house sat over, some people call it a cellar hole, is trapezoid in shape. It's not rectangular. You can say, well, it's just a coincidence, but the next chamber over, the chamber in ruins, the roof slab fell into the chamber and the lintel stone's in there. And it's hard to get into the chamber because there's about a 7,000-pound roof slab in the structure today. But he was able to get his LiDAR in there. And again, if you look at the LiDAR, it's trapezoid. The sacrificial table's groove on it is not, again, rectangular. It's actually about 9 inches shorter at the top. It's trapezoid. And there's a little area, like a little niche to the left of that sacrificial table. I was just up there with my dog tonight, just checking up on the site. And I'm looking at it again with my eyes. I'm like, how did we miss that all these years? It's, again, trapezoid. And trapezoid can be used in South America and some of the ancient sites. I've been to Mexico. I've seen it. But it's also found in some of the sites in Ireland and some of the sites we've seen in England. And in the floor plan, too, not just in the doorway shape, but trapezoid. And the other thing is LiDAR showed is the corner of these walls, like the Patty chamber, the chamber in ruins, and so forth. If you look at it very closely, they're core built. They're not vertical corners. They're actually tilted in. And again, that's kind of an old technique of kind of bridging the ceiling, kind of an inverted staircase kind of shape. And another thing we're using that LiDAR is for a standard unit of measure. Because whoever built the site must have used some sort of yardstick to build it. And Roscoe Whitney, 85 years ago, he was an MIT engineer. He worked for Mr. Goodwin, first researcher. And he set up a plane table, and he did cross-section, profile, and plan views. And we have all that data saved today. It's about 85 years old, all on our records. We got thousands and thousands of stuff. My dad kept everything, which is fortunate, and so did the people before him. So he said, whoever built the site, even didn't know or give a damn about linear measurements, because I've looked at the height, the width, the depth of these structures. I've measured them very carefully, and they don't conform to imperial measurements like inches, feet, yards, and old raw English rods, or anything else that he was aware of 85 years ago. We think, and it started when I did my diorama in 1977, because we went up and measured the site. We were already aware of a thing called the Megalithic Yard, and we went up and kind of just, played around with that up there. And then we did it more recently, and we were using that LiDAR too. It seems like the site might conform to the Megalithic Yard. And that's found in some of the sites over in Europe, some of the 50,000 megalithic sites. I don't think they've measured them all. But Dr. Alexander Thom from Scotland actually is the father. They consider him the father of archeoastronomy. Some do, anyway. Well, we had dinner with him back in 1982 in his house in Dunlop, Scotland. And, we were talking about the Megalithic Yard and everything. And it's come up in South America, also in some of the mounds like Watson Break in Louisiana, Poverty Point. Dr. John Clark from BYU wrote up an article all about 83 centimeters, and as well as another measuring, measuring unit, I should say. And the 83 centimeter caught me, because when I converted it over to inches, it comes out to 32.64 or 2.72 feet. That's a megalithic yard. I'm like, oh my God. And he had found that in some of the sites like Teotihuacan in Mexico, which I've been to. He found it down in Peru, and he also found it again in like Louisiana and some of the mounds down there. And I think more work has to be done on that. It's preliminary. We really don't want to jump to conclusions, but I know some of the other researchers from NERA have found that in the Hudson Valley too, in some of the sites. So I think a lot more work has to be done. And maybe LiDAR might be the tool to use, at least to get, to collect some of that data of the size of these structures. So that's all kind of new in the last 2 years as far as LiDAR, and as far as the Serpent Walls and the windows, that's all kind of new in the last 6 years.
So with the, you mentioned the sacrificial table a little bit ago. Are there blood channels in this table? Are there what was it that brought us to the name sacrificial table?
This is a good question, because that's weird, Joe. There's actually an oracle chamber under it, if I'm right. Is that right, Dennis?
That is correct. Yeah, you did your homework. Excellent. Yeah.
This is the weird part of the whole thing.
Yeah, that makes it a little different than all the other sites, even at North Stonington. It has so much, and the Hudson Valley is loaded. Yeah, our site's kind of like the Reader's Digest. I mean, it's 110 acres. Everything's kind of compressed on it. But if you go Hudson Valley or North Stonington or some of the Gunjiwamp or whatever, they're all structures. You have to actually drive between them in some cases. You might see a chamber or two together, and then you have to drive or walk a distance to see the next structures. Ours is kind of compressed. I think that's the thing that makes it a little bit different. We haven't quite found anything quite like our site, but individually, the chambers, the standing stones, cairns, and all that stuff is all over the place, the same kind of construction. But the table is a bell shape. It's about 9 feet by 6 feet. We actually located it where it came from in the bedrock, where it was quarried from. And it was about 40 feet north of where the table is presently sitting today. And it's sitting on 4 legs next to the oracle chamber, as Ron said. And there's no tool marks. Again, if it was built by the Patties, they would be using probably the star drill and the plug and feather. As a matter of fact, we have a plug and feather kit, because when the Patties were there, they actually had quarrymen up taking the site apart. Rather than building the site, they're actually having some of the stones removed for local building projects. We think today perhaps a quarter of the site's removed, and I counted 12 plug and feather drill marks. And they would use a star drill, they would make the hole, and then they put 2 tapered guides in each of these holes, and then they would use a maul, and they would stick in a metal plug, it's like iron or whatever the material was, and they would hit it, and they would actually separate the stone that way. It would actually cause stress along that, where all those holes were and where the plug and feather were. And so if the site was all built by historic people, the monoliths, the astronomical alignments, all those spine stones, all the roof slabs, the sacrificial table, and then we have underground drains. There's about I think there's 12 underground drains on the site, and they have little capstones, actually parallel walls, or like a small scale chamber, if you will, with little stone slabs on top. And those stone slabs are again peeled off the bedrock, but you don't see the drill marks in the quarry sites. You don't see them on the sacrificial table itself. And where the table came from is actually the astronomical center of the site. That was determined back in 1970s, and in the 1930s there were two cairns there. Goodwin diagrammed them. His right-hand man, Malcolm Pearson, the gentleman my dad eventually bought the site from, actually was a professional photographer, and he photographed the site starting in 36 when he showed Goodwin the site, and Goodwin bought it in 37. Then he put up a chain link fence and began excavating it, and cleaning it, and trying to do some restoration up there. Goodwin died in 1950, and then he willed the site to Malcolm Pearson, and that's how my dad, that's who my dad met. But so. I mean, the work, just a lot of stonework went on without using modern tools, So I think there'd be thousands of those drill marks all over the hilltop, at all those big slabs of stone in the walls or out in the quarry sites, and they're just not. So, but the table's pretty. Yeah, it has a big groove. Again, it's trapezoid. It has a runnel, and below the runnel, where it is in the bedrock, it's been notched out. Ron, you haven't been to the site, right? You saw some of the photographs of that.
Photos, yeah, they're impressive.
Yeah.
And I mean, like you said, it's a cornucopia of all these different techniques and different things. I have never heard of anything like the Oracle Chamber being found at the other side, which is just bizarre.
It's pretty complex, actually. Yeah.
Complex, yes, that's the word I would use for it.
There's a lot of features in it. I'm glad you brought that up, because it is next to the table, and there's a tube that actually connects them. It's kind of a squarish tube, if you will, not quite square, but it goes from the Oracle Chamber, runs 6 feet through a very thick wall, right? Comes out underneath the sacrificial table. And the end of it actually found out from some vandalism. We had to do some repairs in 2019 in the fall after some vandalism that made the news. We found that the end of it's flared out maybe like a trumpet or a clarinet. You know how the ends flare out for sound, acoustics? And they actually flared the end of that out. So we think it was an oracle tube, and inside the oracle chamber, right below that, there's a step. It's actually part of the bedrock, and what they did is they quarried most of the floor away and probably used it for building material, and that way they lowered the floor. But below that oracle tube, they left part of the bedrock, and it makes a perfect step. It's solid. It's still part of the bedrock. You stand on it, and somebody around 5.5 feet tall, roughly, it's just about perfect. And you yell through there, and the voice comes out under the table. And there's a ramp on the opposite the oracle chamber to the table's orientated east-west. On the east end is the oracle chamber. Towards the west is this big pile of stone. It's a ramp area. It has an underground drain in it, too, one of the drains. But we think it's a spectator, or where people would actually observe a ceremony maybe going on. And looking down at the table, if somebody goes in there today and yells through that too, especially somebody with a really good voice, a loudmouth, we had a few of those that work for us. It was always funny. They really did a good job too. They could yell in that, and the voice comes out. It sounds like the oracle, like to speak. The sacrificial table might be talking to you, like a spirit of God or something like that. So that's the thought on that. There's no other practical use for that we can think of. And when Goodwin came, when they cleaned out the dirt, the table was buried to the top. He didn't know it was sitting on legs, and they photographed it. It looks like the table sitting on dirt. They went down, they found the 4 legs, and then they went down the wall there where the oracle chamber is, and somebody moved the rock, and it was loose, and when the rock came out, there's the oracle tube. The other side of it was blocked too, inside the oracle chamber. It was like they plugged it up, whoever was using it. It might be like the Wizard of Oz, I don't pay attention to the man behind the curtain. But inside the oracle chamber, there's an 8-foot bed with another window. We mentioned windows. It has a window. You could actually look through the entire chamber. If you were laying in there, almost in secrecy, nobody would know you're in that, in this kind of a underground bed, if you will. It has a chimney, and the chimney's on the north side. The chamber runs north, south, east, and west. It looks like the letter Y. If you stripped off the roof, it's almost like the letter Y in the alphabet. And the chimney had 2 stone louvers. And we opened in 1958. Goodwin photographed them when he first got there in the 30s. And 20-something years later, we opened it up in 1958, and somebody stole those 2 louvers. They actually could be used to adjust a draft, And we got photographs of them. It's a shame. I don't know if it was a visitor or somebody snuck up there at night and took them, but we never seen them. They've been gone, over 60 years now. And inside is actually a stone bench. It's like a seat. It runs about maybe 5 feet, and it's carved 90 degrees into one of the oracle chambers. Consists of a large glacial boulder split in half, and part of it's been moved about 4 or 5 feet to the south, and that And over that, they built a core-belled ceiling, and that's the east-west wing. So when you walk in to the oracle chamber, you're looking north. If you walk about halfway, you see the oracle tube on your left, the bed's just below that, and off to the right, the chamber goes to the east. And it's all core-belled over your head. It's that arch kind of shape without a keystone. And right there on your left is part of the bedrock, that this big boulder, I should say. It's got a 90-degree cut where you can actually sit about maybe 3 people. And what you're looking at, you're looking south, and you're looking into a beautiful, like a niche in the wall. It's like a closet, we call it. And it's one of 5 closets in that chamber. I don't know what the farmer would be doing with a stone chamber with 5 closets. I have no idea. But whoever built it put a lot of time and effort into building, these special features in there. There's 2 underground drains in that chamber, and then there's 2 carvings. One is of a deer. They call it the deer carving. And Goodwin knew about it in the 30s. But soon after that, people go, it doesn't look like a deer antler. It kind of goes straight back, kind of with a slight curve to it. Well, they started calling it in the 60s as the ibex. And I did a little more research, and I found out there's different types of ibexes in Europe and France and so forth. This looks like the Iberian ibex. It has the same kind of antler. So I don't think it's a white-tailed deer. We have those on the hill. They live up there, right now they're up there.
Yeah.
But I think it's an ibex. And the other thing is it's an arrow carving, and it's right by the exit, which was a window, actually. It was just a window. In the window's position today, that we're wondering in the winter solstice, we're going to try to check it next year, because we did a forestry thing for 2 winters. We had all this equipment out there removing trees with a licensed forester. They did it very carefully. And we have one illumination in the oracle chamber. That's at 2,500. I mean, the watch house. That's a 2,550-foot serpent head. Next to it's a chamber, and the sunlight goes in and illuminates a stone inside of it. We could never see that until 2 years ago because of the trees in the way. The oracle chamber may have an illumination too. So we're going to try to watch it this winter around the solstice and see if anything happens, illuminating that deer carving, because that does happen. Whether it's the Chaco Canyon, which we were at 3 years ago, or the caves out in Colorado called Pathfinder and Creek Caves. I've never heard of them, but the sunlight goes in, and on the equinox, the sunlight goes in and illuminates carving of snakes in both of these caves. And there's another cave called Mojave North in California, natural cave, but inside's petroglyphs. And on the equinox, the sunlight again goes in and illuminates, splits it in half with the light and shadow of a serpent carving. And on the equinox, that rock illuminates, and that's right next to the serpent's head. So we think we got a serpent equinox thing going on at our site too. Chichen Itza, Kukulkan comes. We've been there about 35 years ago. The serpent comes down the 91 steps on the equinox. So it's interesting. There might be something going on, across the landscape over many years with this equinox and serpent thing going on. Even in Mexico. So. We have 57 alignments of the sun, moon, and stars that we know of today. That could be wrong in 10 years, but that's our best knowledge right now, including an illumination in the watch house. 57 alignments.
That's impressive. Like, really impressive.
Well, thank you.
Know that these, these ancient sites, for whatever reason, these people were definitely watching the skies. They were watching the stars. They were watching for these the equinoxes, like you said. It almost seemed like they were making sure that if there was any deviation, they would know. That's kind of like with was it Dagger Rock? I think was the one that I kind of partly remember. I can't remember exactly where it's at, where the sun dagger comes through, and there's the spiral, and it intersects the spiral in the center. Like
Chaco, yeah, the sun dagger, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it just seems to me that, this is something we see worldwide. Again, they collectively were watching for continuity.
Exactly.
I think that's kind of what I'm trying to get at. And if there's any continuity, then something really bad was about to happen. And I think they were kind of, these were tests. These were like their early warning systems, if you will.
Oh, definitely, yeah, and they depend on that for growing season and for reproduction, and even in South America, they had the hitching post, the Machu Picchu, and they had like, if the sun didn't start moving, back to the south, I guess our summer solstice is their winter down there, and they were worried about the sun not coming back and getting brighter, and so I remember that, and I got to get it. We used to have Inca Sun, one of the groups, play at our place here from Peru, and I talk about that. And plus, it's been on TV a lot anyway, but kind of into that. But our site would be watching the limits of the sun, and then we have the 18.5-year lunar cycle. And if something wasn't right, they would definitely know it. Because over time, they fall out of sequence a little bit. I know even at Göbekli Tepe, I've been reading Andrew Collins. He's been to our site, actually did a couple of radio shows with Andy. He's a very nice guy. And he talks about the serpent carvings there too, going back, almost 11,800 years or whatever. I'm like, yeah, there's a serpent again. It goes so far back in time, and then they have the I think there's a fox, with a hairy tail, which some people think might be a comet too. But yeah, I mean, they actually moved some of the stones to Göbekli Tepe because the Earth's tilt, the obliquity, is a very slow change of 41,000 years, and then the precession of the equinoxes is about, I think it's 25,920 years. I've seen some differences on that, but about 26,000 years. You're kind of, and that changes the pole star. And 4,000 years ago, Draco, the star Thuban, is one of the stars, Alpha Draconis, was the pole star, so they would have watched that serpent spinning around that star about 4,000 years ago. The Egyptians were watching it a little bit earlier, around the time the Great Pyramid was built, I think 4,600 years ago. But today it's Polaris, so Thuban's kind of on the side, circumpolar. But back then it would have been kind of very, very special. There it is. It's, one of its stars is the pole star, and there's Thuban spinning around it, So that might have been why the serpent was so important. We have snakes too around here, but I know St. Paddy drove out. We've been to Ireland, but they never had any fossil records of serpents. But he did try to drive away the serpent pagan religions, I guess, and Adam and Eve with the serpent, and even our medical staff, I think, for healing has 2 serpents. If I'm not mistaken. So there's a lot, but that serpent that wraps around 2,550 feet actually touches every astronomical foresight. To have an alignment, you should have like a back sight, foresight, like a gun sight, and then you're looking at the object, rising or setting, sun, moon, or star. And those foresights, those monoliths, and the marker stones are in that body of that serpent. And one thing we think, it's protecting that sacred area. Serpent might, so it depends who you talk to and what culture, but it might also mean protection too, of that sacredness. This is a sacred area here, and outside of that, the non-sacred area, perhaps, that's what it looks like anyway.
I would say with the clustering that you see, specifically with your site, unlike what you had mentioned with some of the other sites where you could actually drive distances between the two. Those low-lying walls have often been, I guess you could say, used as markers for some of these more ritual sites or ceremonial sites, religious, sacred, whatever you want to call it. And that area that you're setting on, it sounds to be like with the sacrifice table and oracle chamber, that this site was a very religious, very spiritual site. And that's why it's this vast complex. I mean, even though it's only 110 acres, I mean, that's, for a paleo man, that's huge.
Right.
That is a vast, massive structure for 4,000 years ago, using stone tools here, or masonry tools. And
you got to remember, Joe, we see this with other megalithic and these ancient sites, is that they're built upon as well.
Like they're layered. There's the site itself is sacred, not necessarily the stones that's built upon it. Right. So they continue to reuse and rebuild and improve upon, or in some cases degrade as the loss of technology occurs.
Those are great points, because I know my wife's been around since 1984, and one of the things she says, it looks like a layering of cultures on our hilltop, from the carbon datings and also from the constructions too. It looks like it's been modified. In fact, in the 70s, we detected that our equinox sunset, actually it's a mid-year sunset, and it's right around the equinox, but it's 2 days difference. It's called the Megalithic Equinox, and it's actually divides a year into like halves or quarters, 91 days and a quarter or whatever. It's because the Earth doesn't go around the sun in a circle. It's elliptical, And so they actually have both at our site. We have both when the sun's rising over the equator to the east or setting to the west, and that's the equinox. We also have the megalithic equinox, or the mid-year. And we think the boulder, it's 4 collinear points, just like Callanash is in Scotland for the sunset on the mid-year. It's kind of weird. We get the same thing. But the boulder is one of the 4 collinear points. And then there's a monolith that fell over the end of the wall. And then there's a hump in the wall, like Our 2,550 foot starts off with 4 humps behind its head, and then it goes into like all these slabs that are stood on the end, which we call, like the spine stones, and then it touches all those astronomical foresights. But on the equinox sunset, about 500 or 600 feet from the main site where this astronomical center is presently today, that is a hump there. That's the fourth collinear point. But number one is the boulder, and that we found in the 70s, we believe was the original astronomical center. And we have maps all drawn up that show, because you can start to talk about coincidences, everything's a coincidence or not, but that we think they moved the astronomical center from there about 200 feet west of where the site is today, the main site, to the main site. They moved it. That's what it appears to be from what we can tell. Again, we can't talk to the original builders, but all of that was surveyed very carefully, and it looks like they started out with that boulder being the astronomical center. For some reason, that didn't work out. They moved. Stonehenge was built over 1,500 years, like stage 1, 2, 3, and ABC. We've been there several times, and they kind of modified it over time, over those 1,500 years. That's our best knowledge of Stonehenge in England, But it appeared one way when they first started building it, and then they took down some of the stones and they sewed up others, and they changed it around. And that's true of some other sites too. So like later generations did something maybe different with it, than how it started out, which kind of makes sense. And then we have all those big 34 slabs all over the hilltop, like somebody else was going to do something, and then they stopped, and then it brings up a lot of questions, was it warfare, climate? Was it something to do with economic, who knows, a disease? We don't really know, We don't, and you hit a good point too. The site, I think, is ceremonial. We don't think it's a living place. We think they lived in hide, wood, or bark, probably down by the Spigot River, which is just to the west of us. And we have a glacial cliff shelter overlooking the river. And back in the 1958, 59, they did excavations and found middle woodland period pottery, dating around 2,000 to 2,500 years old. To the west of us, beyond the river, is the Pawtucket Native American Trail. And on the east side, we have the Pentucket. So our site was kind of by not only waterways, which were used as highways, but actually, footpaths used by Native Americans on both sides of our hill. So there were people here, definitely, and it would have been a place that stuck out like a sore thumb, too.
Wow. So has there ever been any remains found there, like any, official, I should say, remains found there, like ancient?
Bones and things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, the soil here is very acidic. Most bones in New England will rot. However, back in 1938, Goodwin found some bones in the middle of the main site, and that's about 1 acre area where most of the structures, but not all, are located. And that where that chain link fence put up by Goodwin in 1937 is still there today. But the site's much bigger than what Goodwin thought, of course. And they found bones, and they actually had them. He kept them, and in 1968, a woman, a school teacher, brought them to the Smithsonian, and they were looked at by Dr. Lucy Huygen. She was a physical anthropologist. And we got all the reports. It actually made it into the news. So I have both the reports and the newspaper paper stories. And I found the bones in a display case. They've been in there the whole time. They were brought down there. She examined them, and it's so. I wish I could read the actual. I wish I had it with me. Her actual report was interesting. There were some markings on the bone that were done while the person was still alive. There were three bones that were human. She identified them. She goes, the thing is, they're more dense bone than I would normally assume. And she went on to describe them a little bit more. And then she said at the very end of her letter, she goes, my personal feeling is that these are human bones. They didn't have radiocarbon dating until 1950 with Dr. Libya 49. So they were never radiocarbon dated, and they weren't protected when they were taken out of the ground by Mr. Goodwin. He didn't, you just picked them up, and they did what they did with them. Today, they would put them in aluminum foil or something else to protect them, and then they ship them to a laboratory immediately, to have them carbon dated if that's what they're going to do with them. But what I thought is, I'm friends with L.A. Mazzulli on the West Coast, and he's done the Paraka skulls in South America. He's used a company up in Toronto, I believe.
Yeah.
And he wants to. He's talked to me about possibly having these looked at for DNA.
Yeah,
so
that'd be really interesting to get some DNA results off that, because
yeah.
the density of the bone being heavier than usual is of great interest.
It is. And it may not be anything, but it does raise your eyebrows just a little bit. And be able to find those in the display case after all these years. So we've identified them, it's like, wow. And there they are in the newspaper articles. There were also some bones that were brought at the same time. They came out of the watch house, again, that, that chamber that's next to the head of that 2,550-foot serpent. And they were looked at by Dr. Lucy Huygen again, and then she showed them to her colleague, and she identified them as bison, buffalo. And he looked at them. She didn't say whether they were from New Hampshire, And he looked at him and goes, yeah, he agreed with her. And she goes, yeah, but they're from New Hampshire. He goes, yeah, it's probably the woodland. I think it's called buffalo. That was
Yep,
probably
woodland
there.
buffalo.
Yeah, in ancient times,
Mhm.
we were in New Hampshire. So,
Right.
but they're in the Oracle Chamber. I mean, the watch house. I'm getting my chambers mixed up. I apologize. But they were in the watch house, and also in the watch house was a stone about an inch high, triangular shape with a hole drilled through it, and a piece of bone about the same height, maybe a little over an inch tall, very small bone with a hole drilled in it. We think these were used as pendants, by whoever, they belonged to. And they were found in that same area where the bison bones were found too. So we do have some bones found there, and there's a couple other bones that were found that we think are much more modern, and probably less than 100 years old. We have some of those on display too. But yeah, the human bones I think should be looked at for DNA. I don't know a lot about the material, whether it will test or not, but I think it's definitely worth a try. And like you say, the density of it seems kind of unusual. She was really perplexed by that. You can read it in the letter, and then she had to say at the very end, I still think these are human bones,
I
So
still think these are human bones. Yeah, that's a good disclaimer, isn't it? I'm in
cover.
sure you get that done. We definitely want to hear the results of that. There's no doubt.
Oh yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah, definitely, yeah. It should be kind of exciting, however it goes, because we've had a
Yes.
lot of interesting people. You were talking about the cryptid. My dad was a good friend of Ivan Sanderson, and Ivan Sanderson. We went and actually visited him at his home in New Jersey back around
Yeah.
'66, and in 1970 we got on the Barry Faber show, WOR in New York. We actually flew down on Eastern Airlines. And they got my interest in flying more, even more than I was already. That's kind of what did it for me. But we went down there. We spent the night down there. We went up in the tower, and we spoke on the show. And Ivan Sanderson was the host that night. I think Barry Faber was on vacation or the day off, and so we got to talk with him all about the site. But we had already met him 4 years ago at his home, down in New Jersey, and he came up to our place many times. So, he was a very interesting guy. And Hans Holzer, and we were on the show with Leonard Nimoy, In Search of back in
Yeah.
'77. And Hans Holzer actually was the one that did the production on that particular episode. So it was like, well, kind of a small world, all these different Charles Hapgood, Professor Hapgood from Keene State, Earth crustal displacement, one of those very interesting but controversial theories about the whole Earth shifting, and Einstein, I guess, endorsed the Ford in his book, before he passed away. So got to meet a lot of really different people and interesting people over the years because of the site. It's like a magnet. I think pulls
Well,
everybody in.
we're gonna have to try to make our way up there at some point just to go
Mm,
check it out. It sounds
yeah,
like the
yeah.
the pictures are amazing, but I'd actually love to get up there and walk the area and
Oh
see it
yeah,
in
yeah.
person. That'd be
I've
amazing.
got to ask one final question, and I know because everybody's going to get on it. Don't ask. Have you ever witnessed anything odd or paranormal at that site?
Like any
Yeah.
kind of lights or apparitions.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's been seen up
Anything.
here, shape-shifting lights. We've had, usually in the fall, we've had different, Jeff Belanger, he's been up here and he's done some work. The Holzer Files came up and filmed us 2 years ago. 2 years ago, they were here for 6 days filming, and David Schrader, he's a radio host. I did
Yeah.
his show a couple of years before. But anyway, the show ran 2 years, and it was all about Hans Holzer, and they were up filming. And if you watch the episode, it was called Ancient Evil. I don't know if that's, I guess it's Hollywood, but
Yeah, it's a little spin there, I'm sure.
That's what they did.
my wife goes, it's called what? She didn't want to hear. But anyway, it's called Ancient Evil. It's the second season. I think it was like episode 12 or 13. And so they were great. They filmed all week, and they brought in Alexandra, the daughter. And I had never met her before because I met Hans many, many times. He started in 1970 visiting us. And by 1992, he wrote a book called Long Before Columbus. The whole book is about our site. And any event, yeah. So they got some interesting things on that particular show, both sound, and they also had her father's camera, and she used it in the Oracle chamber, kind of facing where you walk into it, kind of the entrance. And there's a really black kind of profile of what looks like a person there. And when they were showing it on a reveal, they were there filming from I think Sunday through Friday, and I was filmed on Monday, I think, and then they filmed me the last time on Friday, really late at night, and they showed me all the stuff. they kept us out of the whole thing. They kept it quiet. They kept it secret to us. And they review it, see our expression. When they showed us the sound, listen to the sound. And she used her dad's camera that he used, all over the place. And it does look really interesting. At first, I looked at it, I didn't see anything, and then I looked at it again. Oh my God, there's an image there. It looks like a person. So I don't know. We've had Betty Hill. She became a friend of my mom. She came up to meet Hans Holzer and have a reading by Ethel Myers back in '74 and remained a friend of my mom's.
Wow.
Kathleen Martin was there, and I just talked to her the other day. Travis Walton came in, paid us a visit, and I took him on a little VIP thing. And I saw a UFO. We live on the side of the hill in summer solstice sunset. We bought property from a developer back in 1985. We're facing the west, and I saw this bright light. I flew about 30,000 hours. So I know, and I flew at night with the UPS system back in the 80s on the 727. So I know what planes look like and the lights, the lights and everything. So I'm looking at this bright object south of the Manchester airport, not too far from here. And all of a sudden, about 2 seconds, this thing went straight to the ground instantaneously. It kind of reminds me of the one over the Dome of the Rocks in Israel, but it came down slowly, but it went up fast. This one right to the ground. So I asked Kathleen Martin about, going into the ground. She goes, I think she said reptilians and also Skinwalker Ranch, but I never seen anything like that. It was just amazing, and this area is kind of a hotbed for UFOs anyway. They have the Exeter Festival coming up, Betty Hill and the incident at Exeter coming up, I think, in a month, and on the 2nd and 3rd of New Hampshire. Kind of like you have the Mothman Festival, which is pretty cool. I was just watching a couple of shows about that. We got the same thing up here because of two things with Betty Hill in 1961, and then the incident at Exeter near Pease Air Force Base, which was a SAC base back then with B-52s and all the nuclear stuff, and that happened in '65.
That was a hot base.
Yeah, definitely, literally. But in fact, I was based there for a while in my flying career. I was based over at Pease. But yeah, so they got a big thing coming up here with UFOs too. So yeah, we meet all sorts of pretty interesting people up here, And David Fravor actually lives right down the road, the Tic Tac. He lives in San Diego. He's from Ohio, went to San Diego, and now he lives right down. I hope he visits because I'd love to talk to him about flying and what he saw. He comes he's only about 5 miles away.
Amazing to hear what the conversation.
Yeah, yeah, I'm sure he's busy too right now with everything.
Yeah, just a little, huh?
A little bit.
We're coming up on our time wall here. We're gonna have to have you back to talk about some more of this weird stuff, though. Because I'd love to get into some of the more paranormal and odd things that you've experienced, not just at this location, but in general, because it sounds like you've led quite the extraordinary life, and some of the people you've been around and been able to experience over that time. So yeah, we'd like to have you back and talk to you about all that stuff at some point. So
well, I really enjoyed it. Thank you both so much. It was a real joy to be on your show this evening. I have to get to the Mothman Festival eventually. So
it's a blast. That's a must. It's such a fun time.
It sounds good. Yeah, it sounds like a lot. We've been to Roswell too, but Mark Eddy's been talking about me, so I got to get down there, Mark. We just went through West Virginia on the way down to Tennessee just recently, and and it wasn't the right time to go to the Mothman, but that's on my bucket list for the future though. So we'll definitely do it.
Definitely.
If you get a chance to make it down here, you're traveling through West Virginia, the Mothman Museum is open year round. And if you get down this way, just shoot us a message. We will be your wild and weird tour guides and take you to all the fun stuff.
Go out to the bunkers.
Yeah, we can take you through the bunkers up there and do the museum tour with you, and then bring you down to Charleston area and let you see some of the mounds that we have here.
I'll take you up.
I think you would be very impressed with the mounds we have here, because they're not unlike Serpent Mound. They're not just a few feet tall. It's like 35 feet tall.
Wow. Yeah. I know Mark was near the Grave Creek Mound too, and that's on my bucket list too. So I'll have to get down.
Yeah.
Sounds great. Well, thank you for the invitation.
Absolutely. Anytime. Like I said, if you're just traveling through the area and you want to see some of those locations, just get a hold of us. You've got our contact info now too. Yep. So just let us know. We'll meet up with you.
Now you know.
That sounds great.
So, well, thanks for coming on. Like I said, we'd love to have you back at another time to cover some other weird topics with you and go over some of your stories from your past. I think that'd be really fun. So thanks for coming on.
Let's get the place, the plug the place. Get the people out.
Tell us where they can, tell our audience where they can find you.
Well, it's top secret. I can't give that out. Area 51 kind of. Actually, so yeah, we're in New Hampshire. Our website is stonehengeusa.com. There's an email address, and we try to answer all the questions as best we can. And we have a phone number there, and we're open every day but Thanksgiving and Christmas, and the occasional blizzard we get. And there's actually a 12-minute video on our website, and a free app download is really nice. So if you can never make it to our site, or you can't make it, in the near future, you can do a complete virtual tour, for the entire what everybody sees when they come. It's kind of cool. So it's a nice thing to do.
Well, we will place a link for that for sure in the episode, so that way people can jump
thank
on
you.
and take that tour.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Well, Dennis, it's been a pleasure having you. Can't wait to have you back again to cover some more stuff. So we really appreciate you, man. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, thank you. My family thanks you, and we'll talk soon. Thank you so much.
Have a good one.
You too.
Well, guys, that was fun. That was a good episode. I enjoyed that one.
That's a great episode.
Tons of information.
Okay,
absolutely.
So we've got a couple of minutes left. So here's let's do a really quick commentary with this. Okay, dude, we got to go there. This place sounds amazing, guys. I'm going to tell you right now. I've did a little bit of research. We have actually were supposed to have did this episode like 2 weeks ago, but so many weird things were happening, and we almost didn't have it happen today. I am so glad that we finally beat back the powers that be that were trying to keep us from doing this. But what a great place! I would suggest you go up and take a look at it if you're interested in any of this kind of stuff. But I am very interested in it because, man, the Serpent Symbology. What do you think, Joe?
Well, I mean, you know me, I'm always a big fan of the Church of the Holy Serpent.
Holy Serpent.
That was our game plan from 2009.
Yep.
To beat back government forces from taking our reptiles, the Church of the Holy Serpent.
They will have to tell everybody what that means, because they're like probably thinking we're some cult leader.
Yeah. So for those of you guys who didn't know, Ron and I have also been involved in the reptile community, breeding reptiles for way too long, and we have fought
reptiles.
Yeah, I mean that you know of.
Just saying.
So we had taken on our shoulders a fight at the state level to take away our pets, and not just ours, like just everybody in the state. There was a blanket ban on reptiles that was being placed, and not just reptiles, but everything. And we stepped up to bat and fought it off, and essentially we fought the law and we won, and it turned out great. And so the Church of the Holy Serpent thing was just a little fun idea we were bouncing around as our fallback plan for the religious exemption clause that they had stated that was in the law. So luckily we didn't have to go start our cult, but here we are. And it all comes full circle, because now it's the Serpent Mounds and the Serpent Symbology.
It's just funny, isn't it, though? Because we do bring it up all the time, and it's just like, what are they talking about? But no, this place sounds amazing. I mean, absolutely amazing, and I'm impressed.
I am too. We're gonna have to definitely get up there and see it, because it's everything that you hear about on TV, and it's actually here in the country. We don't have to travel to Ireland. We don't have to travel to Europe.
Away from Salem, by the way.
That's true, and that's a whole other trip.
That's a whole other trip right there. So
yeah,
got a lot of weirdness on that trip.
We can make a big family vacation, a big wild and weird family vacation here in a couple of years.
Yeah, just document the whole thing. It'd be great, right?
Yep.
Well, maybe some people out there who are watching would like to help contribute to that fund. I don't know. If you do, maybe one day I can make it to where you can. But right now, you really can't. The only way that you can is by buying a few of our little knickknacks and trinkets that you'll catch on the road and sometimes on Etsy. That's your way soon. And all the wonderful support you guys gave us. And like I said, I saw a lot of that this weekend, and I'm very, very grateful. All of us are.
Yeah, again, we thank you guys. You're the reason we keep doing this show week to week. And those of you who support us by buying all of the weird stuff are what helps keep this show free for eons and eons to come. So if you have not yet, go ahead and mash that like and subscribe button. Hit the notification bell if you're watching on YouTube. And hit the notification options on the podcast. So every time new content comes out, you are alerted on your phone and you do not have to wait to digest our content. Like, share, subscribe. Find us anything or anywhere, wildandweirdwv.com. Also, remember, go check out Hellbent Holler. Go look over at their YouTube. Like, share, and subscribe there as well. Check out all the fun stuff that Jessi and Joe are doing. I know that they actually wrapped a recording of Dark Dives just before her power went out, thankfully. So that way this week's episode shouldn't get too messed up for them. They'll have content rolling out for you very soon. And you can go show your appreciation to them by just giving them a like, share, subscribe, follow, all that good stuff. So without further ado, if you have had a sighting yourself, you can head over to wildandweirdwv.com, hit the contact us button. Well, nope, take that back. That's now a report a sighting button.
Sighting.
It is the report a sighting button, and it will take you to our standardized sighting report, and you can fill that out. If you want to come on the show, you can also go to that same spot and just say, hey, I want to come on the show, and we'll work it out for you to get on the show. If you've got any kind of comments, concerns, we don't want to hear them. No, if you've got questions or anything like that you'd like to hear us go over or answer on the radio show, you can send us an email at wildandweirdwv@gmail.com. You can reach us with any inquiries you have. You can talk to us about whatever experiences you've had. You can request to come on the show. You can even send us a request for an interview you would like to have, somebody you would like to have us have on our show. We'll reach out to them and make it happen. So until next time, everybody, stay wild and weird.
Wait, no, that's not how we end this show ever, and you're not going to start now.
I mean, what am I going to do? And remember, if you don't like, share, and subscribe, a massive megalithic stone might just fall on your house and crush you like something out of the Wizard of Oz. Stay wild and weird, everybody.
It's better.